All right, folks. Well, welcome back to our third and final webinar in this series on farm and ranch succession. Today, we're going to cover the last two sections of the workbook and then talk a little bit about how you can find other experts to help you through this process and how you figure out what's next. So when we do a quick review of the first two webinars, we showed you this article from the Wisconsin Extension Service and the 10 things to consider for succession planning. And we talked about how section 1 covered helping you organize your information, helping you analyze the financials, estimating the family living needs, and then evaluating long-term care needs and options. So what we're going to do first is talk about the elements of section 2 in your workbook. And again, if you don't have a copy of the farm succession workbook, let us know and we'll be happy to send those to you. What we're going to cover quickly is the communication aspect of this process, how the family develops and discusses their intentions and priorities, how you as an individual can evaluate your own communication skills, developing that management transition plan. And then we're going to touch on one of the most difficult topics for this whole process, which is the issue of fair versus equal, and how fair versus equal is often a stopping point for some people in this process because they can't figure out how to work through that. So before we do that, we wanted to point out a really important part of the workbook, which starts on page 38. And they call it evaluating the D risks. And so the D risks are death, disability, disaster, divorce, disagreement, debt, depression, dysfunction, and denial. And I'm going to turn it over to Suri and have her talk to you a little bit about her experiences working in this area.
Thank you, Lucy. As we look at that, evaluating the D risks, we think of many things and we look at that quick list. We may not really have much of that going on in our eyes. And we may see several things that could potentially, as we look ahead in the next, let's just say 1 to 2 years or 3 to 5 years, do we want to go ahead and just visit about this? And on page 38, we do have a way of evaluating those. And so, you would give one of these a 0 if you felt there was virtually going to be no impact, a short-term nuisance at worst. A second, just not to reiterate what's in your book already, but there is some probability that it could happen. And you look on the box to the left, you can give a little rating, and then you can score on your worksheet, short-term impact, moderate disruption, significant short, long-term impact, and severe to catastrophic. And so as we jump over to the next page, we have some boxes that will allow us to put a little score in there. And I just think there's not enough that can be said about the upcoming events that we could potentially look to within our family or within the elements of having a disaster. Are we in a situation of maybe just fire or hail or strong high winds, things that come up that we do not plan on ever, but that could come up, disaster, divorce, debt. Can we address that? Can we talk about that? Do we have anything going on with maybe some denial and disagreement? Those are all listed here. And as we just try to be really practical as we start this process with each other, that we know that we do need to set some priorities for these Ds. And page 40 and 41, how you to consider strategies to address these risks. Cannot say enough about this resource that helps you to actually do the planning. It's hard to specifically say anything about each one, but I think that everybody kind of has an idea if there are a few Ds that are infiltrating the succession, if they're standing in the way, if they're kind of difficult to talk about, there are ways to maybe break this down even a little more specifically and not be offensive to each other, but to be able to just accept it for what it is and say, we don't want anything to stop. And this is totally at the end of section 2. And I hope that if you have any questions on this, you would feel free to ask Lucy about it, and for us to be able to meet with you and walk you through some of these discussions would really possibly be beneficial, a neutral person in the room. These are tough subjects. So thank you, Lucy.
Sure. One of the things that we were talking about as we were putting this presentation together is that the three of us have worked with different families around the state, and we realized that all of them were facing some of these D events. And so I thought maybe we would just talk a little bit real quick about what those look like in different families without giving, too much information away. I worked with a group recently that I'd say the big D events were the death, a death of a couple of different family members was really kind of impacting the situation and how they worked through it. There was a fair amount of disagreement that had popped up between different members of the family. And, when we were talking about this, some of these Ds are not necessarily bad. A disagreement can be healthy. It can spur conversation. Um, Divorce can sometimes be the best option for all parties involved. Um, but the problem is when these D events really impact the family's ability to work together and come up with a succession plan that everybody can live with. That's when they become problem areas. And then there was probably some element of dysfunction too that takes a little bit more to work through, um, but can still be addressed in helping everybody move forward. Sonia, do you want to talk about the D events that you've witnessed?
Yeah, I would say that the three that come to mind in working with a particular case, the three Ds were dysfunction, denial, and disagreement. Great, great family to work with, but these Ds were getting in the way. It wasn't so much that they weren't recognizable, but they weren't quite sure how to get past them. So if they would go through these pages that Siri just mentioned, I think that if they start out a large number, large probability number, large Ds, that as they would work through them and work with you and coordinators, that they would recognize that the number may not go down significantly, but the ability to keep them at the risk they were and still identify the potentiality of them could really get them to a point where it would be as if these Ds didn't even exist or didn't get in the way.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. And how about you, Siri?
I think those are some of the ones that do come up the most. And you would almost think that you would look toward, possibility of the disability and the death and those things, but they're just that disagreement coming in is my concern. And I believe that, if you are having members of the family that really struggle because they are off the place and they are invited to come back, or they are thinking they would like to come back, and this is wearing them, eroding them. There's a depression kind of looming that, hey, I might never get to be part of that ranch again. um, and then just sometimes there is dysfunction within the family where everybody wants to talk at once, or they are not really wanting to respect what the owner generation is trying to establish and set up and have them come back, or to have them be able to be part of every discussion, or however those denial things come up. Those are what I have seen experience the most, and we'd like to help.
Yeah, thank you. I think what's so valuable about this section of the workbook is that it really um, it gives the family members a chance to bring up some subjects that have maybe been lurking around, and no, and everybody's been a little afraid to address them. And it comes back to the helping the families be very practical. What are we going to do about these different D events? Who's responsible? When are we going to try to get this figured out by? How much is it going to cost to get some of these answers or things like that? And I think that this all ties into communication, but making it easier for family members to talk about these hard topics and put them down on a piece of paper or in a workbook electronically, whatever it is, and start working towards resolving them. I think that's one of the best tools that this workbook has. Okay, so switching topics a little bit, speaking of difficult conversations, Sonia, talk to us about fair versus equal.
What is fair? What is equal? It's a bit of an oxymoron. If you look at page 34 of your workbook, the last two questions at the bottom of that book, I would say it would be a great conversation starter to start with the last one. The answer to that question, what are your 3 goals for you and the farm? The answer will help you decide what type of distribution principle to use between equality, proportional, or needs-based. So a good place to start would be at that question right there on that one. And then you would move up to listing the heirs and farm business successors and starting some conversations with what it says there. These are great conversation starters that can lead into a very open, authentic conversation, not just about the D's, but about laughter, memories, traditions, heirlooms, rituals. What was it like growing up? Well, we used to do such and such, and we did such and such, and they would laugh, and you could hear the greatness of that family working together, which we have found those types of conversations and memories really can help address all those D's that Siri just talked about. Going a bit further, and I'm not sure where you want to start with the film, I want to talk just a little bit about, is fair equal? The concepts of equality and fairness often get intertwined, but they hold distinct meanings, especially in context of estate planning. Equality emphasizes treating everyone the same by distributing resources evenly, while fairness, on the other hand, is the perception of what is just, considering specific circumstances and contributions of individuals. Fairness doesn't always mean equal, though equality can sometimes lead to equitable outcomes. A humorous yet insightful demonstration is the video that Lucy is going to share with you. And I wasn't sure we were going to use it, so I was going to give you a bit of a purview, but I think I'll let you figure it out on your own.
All right. Let's make this work here.
So a final experiment that I want to mention to you is our fairness study. And so this became a very famous study, and there's now many more, because after we did this about 10 years ago, it became very well known. And we did that originally with capuchin monkeys, and I'm going to show you the first experiment that we did. It has now been done with dogs, and with birds, and with chimpanzees, but with Sarah Brosnan we started out with capuchin monkeys. So what we did is we put 2 capuchin monkeys side by side. Again, these animals, they live in a group. They know each other. We take them out of the group, put them in a test chamber. And there's a very simple task that they need to do. And if you give both of them cucumber for the task, the two monkeys side by side, they're perfectly willing to do this 25 times in a row. So cucumber, even though it's really only water in my opinion, but cucumber is perfectly fine for them. Now if you give the partner grapes, the food preferences of my capuchin monkeys correspond exactly with the prices in the supermarket. And so if you give them grapes, that's a far better food, then you create inequity between them. So that's the experiment we did. Recently, we videotaped it with new monkeys who had never done the task, thinking that maybe they would have a stronger reaction, and that turned out to be right. The one on the left is the monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece she eats. Then she sees the other one getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again. So this is basically the Wall Street protest that you see here.
Every time I watch that video, I wish there was a follow-up where that monkey got her own grapes at some point. But
Yeah. The video is so poignant with why it's so important to carry through with estate planning. How do people perceive equitable pay and contributions? It's about perception. The perception of equitable reward is subjective, oftentimes, and it varies widely among individuals. Now, in the context of estate planning, a common issue is assigning equal shares of assets to the next generation. That's what we have been taught to think, that that's what it means to be equitable and fair. You just give everyone the same amount. But this can unintentionally set up scenarios that you saw in the monkey film and that seem unfair to family members. For instance, if one heir has significantly contributed to the family business, receiving an equitable share as someone with less involvement can feel inequitable. Some questions to consider in your estate planning about how you're going to divide your assets. Here's some thoughts. You could divide the assets equally among all heirs, regardless of participation in the business. What have they done to contribute or not? You can let the heirs sort it out themselves. You can allow the government to decide. It's no longer your decision, it's someone else's. You can distinguish personal property from business property and then divide accordingly. What other ways can you compensate or reward heirs beyond equitable shares? Well, there's a consideration of sweat equity or other contributions to the family operation. There's the provision of personal property versus business assets. There's the recognition and discussion of caregiving roles or other non-monetary contributions. Something has to happen for the owners that are going to retire. Do they need additional care? Who's going to do that? Who's going to pay for it? Now, research has identified some predictors of conflict when it comes to asset distribution. One of the main indicators there will be conflict is siblings hold differing perceptions or views on fairness. Also, past sibling relationships have been strained or distant. Considerations when deciding how to distribute. What are the financial needs of the owner generation? Will they have enough for retirement? Or do they need to retain some of the assets? What about promises or commitments? Have promises and commitments been made to certain successors? And is everyone aware of them? Again, the recognition of sweat equity. Should contributions of time and labor be factored into the distribution? Again, what about retirement and caregiving provisions? What about support for the succeeding generation? Will the current owners need to increase farm income or add new equipment to support the next generation? What about consideration of children's spouses and grandchildren? How do relationships and additional family dynamics influence the decision to distribute the assets? Inheritance provisions for on-farm versus off-farm heirs. Are there distinctions in how on-farm and off-farm heirs have been treated or will be treated in the will? Those are great discussion points, and sometimes people think about them. They have all these questions that I mentioned and more, but they're not quite sure how to handle them. And that's the reason that farm succession coordinators are here. We're here to help. As Sari pointed out, in a very neutral, unbiased manner, we're here to help walk you through this process. This workbook is not an end-all, but in many ways, it's a great guide to get through all of this. So again, thank you, and contact Lucy. She's got great information. Thank you, Lucy.
Thanks, Sonia. Um, One other thing to add about the fair versus equal topic, when we were researching some different articles for this webinar, I came across a article about Oklahoma State University has a statistical model that compares various transition strategies and their probabilities of success. And the results show that the most common farm succession strategy of dividing everything equally, right, regardless of who's living where and things like that, that strategy has the lowest success rate when they run it through their statistical model. And so, this brings us back to, if the goal of the family is to keep the farmer ranch in operation for multiple generations, then dividing it equally among however many siblings is not necessarily going to help them reach that goal. And that's when we have to have these tough conversations, do some of this pre-planning to figure out what are some other ways we can transfer this to the next generation, that helps us, meet those goals of keeping it in business. So something to think about. So the other big part of this section too is trying to help the family members communicate their intentions. And there are pages in the workbook, specifically, let me find it really quick here, specifically on pages, starting on pages 23, where again, it helps you figure out what your intentions are. And actually, I want to pull up that page really quick because I want to have it in the video. Whoops. Dang it. Close that one out. So when we scroll down to those pages, again, it gives people time to think about these questions, and then it also gives them a place to physically write down how they feel about these. So I want the farm to remain in my family's possession, strongly agree. I want the farm business to continue after I retire and be managed and owned by my family. These are the intentions for the owner generation, right? So it has you go through and you answer all of these prompts, gives you time to think about them, and then it moves into intentions for the successor generation. So, I am willing to make financial sacrifices and invest in or work for farm assets to reach my goal of owning the farm. How do they feel about that? And what can be really valuable is having all of the family members go through these, whether they're their spouses or grandchildren or whoever's going to be involved. And and now you have a place where you've physically written it down. The farm succession coordinator can collect all of these and help the families have conversations. What I like about this, as far as helping with the communication part, is that people can do this on their own. Then it gives them time to figure out, how do we want to communicate what these intentions are and what our values are. There's a values exercise, and then there's another part where we can kind of talk about what our core values are, what our values are for the operation, and again, just bridging that communication gap. So I want to go back to my slides. And we could spend hours doing a training on communication, because frankly, uh, that's why we as mediators have work to do, why we have jobs, and it's why farm succession coordinators can be so valuable. Um, when people are working through tough topics, communication often can take a hit. People will stop sharing ideas with each other, sharing feelings as things get prickly. And I feel like one of the best roles that the farm succession coordinators can provide is just sitting everybody down and helping them hear each other, helping them figure out how they want to communicate, helping them make those statements. The biggest rules for communication are to be honest, be clear about your intentions, and then really focus on your listening. A lot of times we anticipate what people are going to say, and so when they start talking, we're filtering it through what we think they're meaning, but really just listening openly and listening for new ideas, listening for feelings, and then using that farm succession coordinator to help you make sure that you're listening accurately, you're communicating accurately. Okay, so now we finally are moving into the last section of the workbook. It talks about creating a timeline and then developing and discussing the estate plan, the succession plan, with the help of professionals. So again, I think that in our experiences, this is where that farm succession plan can run into a wall. Okay. How retired does that older generation want to be? And for some people, this beach scene may look like perfection. And for other people, that may look like a nightmare. We know plenty of producers who never want to set a foot off of the farm or ranch when they're retired. We have other people that are want to travel, want to go visit other family members, want to still be involved in the operation, but maybe don't want to be there in the cold months. In Wyoming, that can be anywhere from October to May, depending on the year. Everybody has to decide for themselves how retired they want to be and what that retirement looks like. So page 43 of the workbook really helps that older generation figure out what looks good to them. And this becomes important because then we also need to communicate that to the rest of the family members. When I don't know if I want to pull up 43 really quick. Let me look at it. It's pretty self-explanatory. But it talks about, how do I want to spend my time during all of the different months? Are there other things I want to do? Are there parts of the ag operation that I love and I want to make sure that I'm here for? And just getting all of that information out there can be very beneficial, especially as folks are starting to try to work through this process. So the other part of this section then is the importance of planning. And lots of ag families meet, on a regular basis to talk about what the plan is for the week or the month or the grazing season, whatever it is. Those are kind of what we would call operational meetings, where they happen often. They're pretty short in duration, and they involve the folks that are engaged in those day-to-day activities. The people that are going to be moving cows to the next pasture, the folks that are going to be actively involved in calving. They're meeting every morning or every Monday over a cup of coffee and figuring out what those things look like. Those are important, and those are a key part of any ag operation. If they're not happening, then this is a good opportunity to have them start happening. This can be a way that through these operational meetings, maybe some of those responsibilities or those duties are passed on to the next generation. Strategic planning meetings are more involved. And so these are going to involve key stakeholders, including spouses, including heirs who don't live on the farm or ranch, but who have, you know, uh, shares in the family trust, things like that. Um, these are going to be less frequent, but they're going to be a lot longer. And so finding the time and date that works for everybody, putting together an agenda beforehand so people know what to expect. These can be really important. In the workbook, they actually give you some guidelines on how to set up those meetings. There's meeting templates. There's sample agendas where you can put in the topics that are important to folks. There's a lot of ground rules that you can implement at this point that can help people feel more comfortable coming to a meeting. I don't think a lot of people like coming to a meeting when they know what time it starts, but they have no idea when it's going to end, especially in when life is so busy. So clearly saying we're going to start this meeting at 6 and we're going to end it at 7:30. Here are the 5 things we're going to cover. Here's what we're hoping to have for, outcomes, and just being really specific. I think that folks who are involved in outside organizations who serve on church committees, those meetings are usually pretty well organized, and that's what keeps people staying involved. It shouldn't be any different for these family discussions about the farm and ranch business. Again, this is where your farm succession coordinator can be really handy. They can help facilitate those meetings. They can help the family members put together the agenda. They can help, you know, help people figure out what's the most important thing that we want to accomplish at this meeting. When do we want to have another meeting? What's going to be the homework in between these meetings? How do we move from just talking about these things to being action oriented? So that's all in section 3. And then finally, we end section 3 with how to find professionals. There's actually questions to ask when you're interviewing professionals to help you with this process. Uh, we get a lot of questions. We'll get calls from folks, can you tell me of an attorney that I can use? And as a state employee, I can't make recommendations. So what I often do is encourage people to talk to their neighbors, talk to somebody else going through this process and find out who they're using. The state bar up at you can see that it's www.wyomingbar.org. They have a search function now where you can put in there what your area of law you're interested in finding somebody and even your location, and they'll kind of narrow down providers in that area who may be able to help. I think the best recommendation is word of mouth and just asking around and finding out who people are using. We recognize that attorneys are going to be uh, important part of this process, especially as a plan is finalized and wanting to make sure it's written in a way that is legal and can be either incorporated into a trust or whatever it is. So we encourage people to be running some of these ideas past attorneys, and then also The same thing with accountants and financial folks. Wyoming does have a CPA association. Again, you can go there and search for folks either in your geographical area or in your, searching for people involved in agriculture and finding somebody that can work with you that way. So what's next? You've watched these 3 videos. You are getting family members together to have some of these tough conversations. We encourage you, again, if you haven't gotten a copy of the workbook and you'd like one, reach out to us. The email, our contact information is on the next page. Reach out to us. Share these videos with family members who may be ready to have these conversations, and then reach out to us to find out about bringing on a farm succession coordinator. Like we've mentioned before, we do have a grant that covers our costs. So at this time, there is no cost to anybody participating in this program. We're happy to help people have these conversations and move forward with a plan that allows them to keep the operation going in agriculture or whatever their own goals are, but helps them move forward. Here's our contact info, and please reach out with any questions. Thank you for watching.